Well, when I first started doing this tour in 2001, it started with a class I was teaching called Defining Blackness, and the very first semester I taught it was in the fall of 2001. And it was taught see, I'm using the passive voice. I taught it in Graham Memorial, that building over there. And we were on the second floor. There were 15 black students and 1 white student in the class. And we looked out the window, and the first thing we saw was Silent Sam. UNC's, if you're not from here, it's our Confederate memorial. And, well, it's one of our Confederate memorials, and that's part of the point. If you go to the state capitol, by the way, you'll see 3 Confederate memorials. So when you come to North Carolina, you know who won the war. There's a lot of interesting arguments about that. I was just reading a great book by a former UNC faculty member, Nell Painter, called The History of White People. If you haven't read it, it's a really good read. And I learned something I hadn't known before, which is always a valuable thing when you're reading a book. And that is, if you go to the state capitol in North Carolina, you'll notice that their Silent Sam is about 25 feet up in the air. And if you go to Charleston, the monument to John C. Calhoun, who is one of the architects of American slave policy, is up on a stick that's about 30 feet high. And I always wondered why you would do that, right? Why would you put the monument so high up? Well, it turns out that there was a tradition among black Charlestonians when they passed the statue of John C. Calhoun to scratch it with their keys. So it was restored and put up on top of a very tall pillar so that they couldn't do that. Whether that's true about the statue in Raleigh, I don't know, but you'll see it's certainly not true about Silent Sam. He is high, but he is not ridiculously high. So we looked out the window at Silent Sam, and the discussion began. This is the very first time I taught the class, the very first day of the class, about how this campus welcomes people differently, about how different people, as they come up to the campus, perceive it differently, and of course in a racialized fashion. And there's a couple of other interesting parts to that. If you start on Franklin Street and you cross over by the post office to where my office is in Battle Hall, you'll pass a roadside marker that Franklin Street is the Jefferson Davis Highway. It's also the Daniel Boone Trail. There's also a marker that tells you that you have come to the country's oldest public university to open its doors. So our histories are telegraphed there. And of course you are greeted by Silent Sam pointing at you because you're coming at the campus from the north. Right? That's, if you don't know your directions, if you can think of which way Silent Sam is pointing, you know which way is north. And it made me think about being in junior high school and high school in eastern North Carolina. I grew up in Greenville, and what it meant to be driving to the beach, going through Kinston, going through some of the little towns, and passing a convenience store, a gas station with a Confederate flag hanging out front, which happened all the time. My white friends and I wouldn't think twice about going into a store in 1973 that had a Confederate flag flying in front of it, but my school in Greenville was about 35% black, and those kids were probably not going to feel like this store was welcoming them. So the same issue can be seen with Silent Sam, and as you may know, he has been a center of discussion for a very, very long time. But in the 21st century, things have changed. Digital documentation has changed the way we can look at the complexity of the past in a very democratic fashion. One of the faculty members in our history department, Fitz Brundage, has worked on a project about memorials all over the state. One of those monuments that he looks at is our Confederate memorial. And if you go to his website through the UNC libraries, you will find the dedication speech that was given when Silent Sam was erected on this campus in 1913. You'll see a photograph. The crowd was a little bit bigger than this, but not a whole lot. But it was definitely a lot whiter, in that it was all white. In 1913, a group of about 200 people, 200 white people, came to listen to Julian Carr. Is that name familiar to anybody? What's famous about Julian Carr? Where's his name embedded in our landscape? His wife, your wife works in Carr Building, right? Which is right over there, the Julian Shakespeare Carr Building, C-A-R-R, not like the drugstore, K-E-R-R, it's C-A-R-R. So on this campus, we have remembered him, and you may know with the Real Silent Sam Coalition, who we've named our buildings after, is questioned. Saunders Hall, the Daniel Student Stores, even Battle and Caldwell and Swain. But I heard the other. Carr is famous because he gave his name to Carborough. Now apparently there was some possibility he could have given his name to Duke. He was a very wealthy industrialist. He had made a lot of money in post-Civil War North Carolina, particularly in textiles and spinning, right? So the Carr Mill of Carr Mill Mall was his mill. He had started out in Durham with a number of mills. So he gave the name to Carborough, and he was asked to give the speech in 1913. And as I said, you can read the transcript of this speech in Professor Brundage's website. The most salient fact, and the reason that what we can talk about in 2014 is very different than the conversations when I was a student here back in the 70s and 80s, is that people say he is a monument to a different past. And I would say that's certainly true. He is a monument to, Silent Sam is a monument to a common way of thinking at his time. And that's true too. But think about it, 1913 is 48 years after the Civil War ended. Right, so he's not a monument that went up immediately after the war, and that is very typical. If you go to Berlin right now, Berlin, the one in Germany, you will find lots and lots of monuments to the Holocaust. Lots and lots of memorials to the people who were harmed in World War II. And they started showing up about 50 years after the war was over. That seems to be a historical truism, as you wait until the population is very old or dead. And then you can start rewriting that history more fully. Well, Mr. Carr, in 1913, dedicates this statue to Anglo-Saxon values by those words. So in 1913, he was remembering the struggle of the Civil War as a struggle for values. And that's why I said we see who won the war, because he was making a dedicatory speech about how those values have been and are being upheld here in 1913. He starts his remarks, however, in a way that makes no question about what that's a statue remembering. And that is, he talks about horsewhipping a Negro wench just off the campus, just on Franklin Street. He whipped her until her skirts were in tatters. And her crime was that she didn't get out of the way of a white woman. And he talks about how she ran to the Union line, which was over here. There were Union troops. And they did nothing to stop him whipping her because they understood. So while we can debate what a statue like that in 2014 means, there was no question what it meant to the people who put it up in 1913. Well, fast forward, of course, we had no black students in 1913, or in 1940, or in 1945, or in 1950, and it was only in 1951 when the first black students were allowed to matriculate at UNC, and that was after a lengthy court battle, which is well detailed in the archival record. Last couple of points before we move away from this area. If you are interested in Silent Sam and his history, you don't even have to go to the web. You don't have to go to the archives. All you have to do is go to Memorial Hall, which I hope you will all do. Remember, this Sunday is the university's 221st birthday. University Day will be celebrated in Memorial Hall at 2 o'clock this Sunday, and our featured speaker is the governor of the state of North Carolina. In an interesting twist, one of the people winning the university award that day is going to be a former governor, Jim Hunt. They're politically kind of different people, which should make for, I mean, how often do you get two governors for one free admission? But if you're around, and if you do go, and even if you don't, if you wait to see a performance, you will see the names of every single person that Silent Sam remembers carved in the walls of Memorial Hall. There are plaques for every single Confederate soldier from UNC. So he is an icon, but he is also remembering specific people. The unsung founders, not so much.